Welcome to the Blue Security Podcast, a weekly podcast for information security defenders, where we bring you discussions on best practices, tools, and implementation for enterprise security. Now, here are your hosts for today's show, Andy Jha and Adam Brewer.
Welcome to this week's episode of the Blue Security Podcast. I'm Andy, your host.
I'm Adam, your co-host.
Well, I just got back from vacation, but it was a brutal week last week. It was the end of our fiscal year at Microsoft. And if you've been following the news, Microsoft went through its typical restructuring each year. But this year was particularly brutal. We laid off about 9,000 people, and then just having laid off another 6,000 back in May. Just over the last few months, over 15,000 people have lost their jobs at Microsoft. And going into this round, there was a lot of talk of restructuring. And I thought that the sales folks, because Adam and I both work for Microsoft, we work in our field sales, and it's a revenue generating arm of the company. And I didn't think that sales would be at risk, but that was really far from the truth. A lot of people in sales all over lost their positions. My team specifically lost over 20% of the people on my team. And I didn't think it would hit that close, but it did. So it was a fairly brutal week for everyone at Microsoft. We all know someone that lost their jobs. We all worked with someone that no longer works there. So, we have some thoughts about that, but really, every time something like this happens, I have kind of flashbacks. And so Adam, will give you a chance to kind of give your thoughts, but I wanted to also talk to people who are in tech, who might be experiencing this or might eventually experience this, how to mentally prepare for this and how to just be ready in case something like this happens, because it most likely will if you continue to work in tech.
Yeah. When we were talking about what our subject would be for the week, it was pretty clear it needed to be this. And so before we get too far into it, Andy, you mentioned we do both work for Microsoft. Andy and I were both not impacted directly by the most recent round of layoffs. However, as Andy mentioned, we certainly are impacted through the loss of coworkers and leaders that we worked with and admired and appreciated. Microsoft lost of really smart, really talented, really capable people. This was not a performance-based cut. In fact, it was clearly very, very random, intentionally so. So the number one, of course, is that we're thinking of those who are impacted, and we recognize even if you didn't lose your job, you're still impacted in the sense of you may be asked to do more with less, and you may be working without folks that you previously worked with. And that is always difficult as well. So of course, start there. As we always do on this show, we try to view things through an academic lens. So we stick to the known knowns and confirmed information and don't get a lot into speculation. So Microsoft did confirm to the media that 9,000 plus people were impacted. Microsoft helpfully provided the context that this was about 3% of its global workforce, because Microsoft employs 228,000 people globally. And so that's about 3%. I think that doesn't tell the whole story. And now I'm getting into not stated facts by our employer. It seems like, based on my lived experience and Andy's lived experience, this was heavily skewed toward the sales organization. And this was previously reported by news organizations such as Bloomberg, which are trustworthy news organizations. So I want to be very clear, although Microsoft has not confirmed this majority targeted the sales organization, other trustworthy news organizations like Bloomberg have reported that as fact, including talented Microsoft reporters like Dinah Bass. So with that, I will say, Andy, you threw out this number of 20%, and I would say my lived experience feels about the same. In my different view of the sales organization from you. And if you check the math, that math checks out. There's about 45,000 people in the sales organization. And if the majority of 9,000 job cuts were in sales, that's closer to a 20% impact. Again, What was confirmed from Microsoft was only the total number of cuts and total number of employees. It wasn't suggested where the cuts lived primarily. It's big and it's impactful. And I will say for me personally, what a new experience I had this time around was that I effectively got the mysterious calendar invite out of nowhere on short notice, joined the meeting where everyone had microphones and cameras turned off and had anonymized names with the subject line that is typically reserved for layoff activities. I got it too. It was to tell me I was not impacted, but it certainly was like flying really close to the sun on that and was deeply affecting for me as well. And so when Andy said, let's do a show about this, I was all in favor of it, even though we've talked about this a little bit in the past, because what we want to do on this show is give you actionable takeaways. What can you go do? And I will admit that my feeling on this has evolved over time, but thankfully, I think it's evolved in lockstep with security strategy as a whole. So here's something cybersecurity defenders can take away from this. I think cybersecurity defenders in the past have over-rotated on protection and not so much on detection and response, the later parts of it, of dealing post-breach. I think we're too concerned with, well, let's stop it, then we don't have to worry about it. And we haven't positioned ourselves well to deal with the inevitability when we take that assume breach mindset and we assume eventually you will have a security incident. And I think my takeaway from this round is I need to apply that same mindset to things like layoffs, where I had felt in the past, like Andy mentioned, I'm revenue generating. I make money for the company. I'm in a growth business for the company. Security still has a lot of room to grow. There's a lot of new opportunity there. I'm therefore safe. I'm in a cheap market. I'm safe. I know someone from Des Moines impacted in this round of cuts. So cheap market, not a factor. I know people in cybersecurity who were cut, not a factor. I know people who were extremely talented and delivered a ton of value were impacted. And so you start to run out of, okay, well, if I do this, I'm safe. And so mirroring that concept from cybersecurity, what we're going to talk about today is how do you prepare yourself mentally and financially and emotionally and professionally, and how do you work through that? Because what this really taught me this time is the randomness is the point. The randomness is the point. And that's because human resources departments are doing what they do best, which is protect the company from legal action. And it is in a company's best interest when they're doing layoffs to make sure there's no patterns around any factor related to you as an individual. We didn't cut just one area. We didn't cut just one age. We didn't cut just one gender. We didn't cut just one race. There's no rhyme or reason to it. That's on purpose. That protects the company. I understand that. But what it also means is that in reality, there's no 100% guaranteed way to like protect yourself and avoid getting laid off. Just like there's no 100% effective way to prevent yourself from having a cybersecurity incident. So then it becomes, what do we do if we get laid off? And how do we manage that? And how do we work through that? And how do we think about that? And that's the thesis for tonight's show. And I will say we did a show on this again 2 years ago when Microsoft did a huge round of layoffs in 2023. And my thinking has evolved based on just how random this round was and how many truly impactful, amazing people were caught up in it. There's no rhyme or reason to it. And just because you're performing at a super high level isn't enough. And again, that's the point. I get that. It's business. So what do you do then? Well, you think about make a plan and execute it when the time comes. So those are my thoughts, Andy, as we kind of get into the meat of the show and what we're going to talk about. But I will say basically getting the entire experience of what it feels like to get laid off up until the person who got on this call led with, you are not impacted. I was thinking I was, and I got that email and I spent about 40 minutes freaking out, waiting to get my notice, and it didn't come. And I'm appreciative of that. But man, does that when you haven't been through it before, because that was kind of my first go round being that close to it, it affects you. It changes the way you think about it and how you want to deal with it moving forward. So this hits near and dear to my heart, that's for sure.
Yeah. And there's also a little bit of like survivor's guilt, afterwards, because you were essentially spared, and you kind of wonder why. You have no idea because everything was so random, and also just morale in general is pretty affected. It's hard to like get back into the swing of things. I know we will for sure, couple weeks. It's always a little bit slow anyways for the first few weeks of the fiscal year, but I can tell you that my team the morale is way down. There's no one who's just like jumping to get back to work. Usually the start of the fiscal year is like a time
Happy New Year. People say Happy New Year to each other. The first person who says Happy New Year to me is going to get read the riot act. I hope nobody does that this year, but that's a normal Microsoft thing, is people will message you for the first half of July, for all of July, basically say, hey, Adam, Happy New Year. How's the New Year treating you? Because it's kind of like the first day of school. Well, there's definitely a dark cloud hanging over it.
Yeah. And, like for me, I've seen my dad, who was an engineer in tech, laid off several times. He worked for IBM back in the 90s, and they went through the huge downsizing of like, the early 90s. And he worked for other companies that he was laid off in. And then I've personally been laid off, multiple times as well. I think 4 now, one of them being at Microsoft. And so like, there's a few lessons that I've taken away from each time. And one of the things that
you reminded me of something before you get into it, Andy. I was mentioning how random it is, and the randomness is the point, and trying to kind of set the stage for, we're going to talk about post-breach, effectively post-layoff, or how to think about it. You mentioned one other thing just now. You're talking about your dad, and you're saying IBM in the 90s. And anyone who's followed the tech industry knows IBM famously went through some really challenging times, especially in the early 90s, before they righted the ship. And that's the other thing that's so unique about these circumstances. Are Microsoft stock just hit an all-time high literally in the last week. The stock is doing great. The Q3 earnings were great. The Q4 earnings, I don't know, but are about to come out. I mean, everything coming out has been positive. Are there risks to the business? Are there concerns? Sure. I mean, the relationship with OpenAI, amongst other things. But ultimately, it's not like Microsoft is a flailing company, is doing layoffs to get its costs in order to survive as a company. It's not a survival thing. It's become like this accepted practice in late stage capitalism to do a round of layoffs. And guess what? Microsoft did a round of layoffs on Wednesday, and on Thursday, the stock was up pretty big. It was a half trading day on Thursday because it was July 3rd, the day before the Independence Day holiday here in the United States. But it just like knee-jerk reaction, Wall Street hears big layoffs and the stock goes up, because it shows like, oh, you're cutting your costs. You're really concerned about your size of your organization. You're really conscientious about it. And big tech has been going through these machinations now, basically going back to the high inflationary environment in 2022. Because if you remember the COVID years, it was really employee positive, to where you could put your open to work shingle out on LinkedIn and get bombarded with offers, typically very good ones. And especially big tech was poaching from each other a lot, which was great for wage growth and for employee opportunity. And if you needed a change of scenery or wanted to go do something new, you didn't have to wait long, and Amazon or Google would drive by and send you an offer. And the one thing is, when you have healthy attrition, it allows you to shrink businesses you want to shrink very organically and without pain. And so I'm not being an apologist here by any means, but I do want to contextualize that the one thing that big tech has been struggling with, and why all these companies keep doing these rounds of layoffs, Amazon, Google, Meta, Microsoft, not so much Apple, but the other ones, is because generally they hire from each other all the time. And that is basically dried up. And so because you don't have this healthy attrition, you don't have ways to organically downsize businesses as you want to change focus. And everyone kind of is waiting for the other guys to start hiring their people so we can get that movement again. And that would actually be way healthier, not only for the tech companies who could then avoid having to do these layoffs, but it'd be great for employees, for workers, because we'd see wage growth, we'd see benefits growth, we'd see all these positive outcomes. But all of these companies are still trying to shrink post COVID when they overhired. And because they're all kind of working in lockstep, at least that's what it appears, but I think it's just they're all in a similar place. It's one of those things where there's no opportunity to shrink through attrition. And so you're seeing these as outcomes of it. And then when you have these big cuts, it only exacerbates the problem because 9,000 super talented people just flooded the job market. And anything Amazon or Meta or Microsoft, or not Microsoft, but Google have available are all going to get chewed up by these 9,000 talented people that just hit the market, and so on and so forth. And so you're just not getting this opportunity to get these back into a healthy state of people coming and going. I was told a couple of years ago, and I haven't seen anything to suggest it's different, that there's a benchmark for healthy attrition, and we are way, way below that at Microsoft, is the feeling. And I'm not revealing any inside information because this is literally like 3 years old, but it feels like that's still the case because you're just not seeing the mobility and movement between organizations the way you used to. And that's a lot of what's causing this too. And so if you're just trying to wrap your mind around like, why is this happening? It's still that hangover, that post-COVID hangover at these companies that got too big. And because they're all not hiring, there's no chance to shrink more gracefully the businesses they want. And so that's a lot of why you're seeing this as well, which is, again, I'm not being an apologist for it, but it's the reason why healthy companies are resorting to this, because they really don't have another way to do it right now. And that's where the job market, despite the data you see reported on CNBC and other things, the big tech job market is still very unhealthy and is still, people feel like they have a cement parachute to where there's nowhere else that can really go that's going to give me the pay and benefits I have now. So I'm stuck here and I can't move, and no one can match this. So until, as an industry, it gets healthy again and you get that movement again, I think you'll continue to see this. I know Microsoft just did, as Andy mentioned, 2 rounds, about 15,000 people. We haven't heard any word from Meta recently or Google recently. They could be set for another round of cuts too. And again, their businesses are relatively healthy from a numbers perspective, from a Wall Street perspective, but it's just a matter of trying to right size their businesses. And the last thing I'll say before we get into, Andy, going back to your point, I kind of posted pretty strongly on LinkedIn, where you have all these LinkedIn influencers, or as they tend to refer to themselves, thought leaders, suggesting this is because AI is taking people's jobs. Now, is AI taking some people's jobs somewhere? Maybe. I don't know. Maybe. Not in sales. I assure you, not in sales. I've seen Reddit posts of people getting mad about H-1Bs and how these tech companies are using too many H-1Bs and doing these layoffs. I also assure you, very few people, I won't say zero, but very few people on an H-1B are coming into a sales organization and selling to American businesses that haven't lived and worked in the United States. You just don't have the cultural awareness of how that operates to be successful. I will say, as someone who worked in enterprise IT for a decade before joining Microsoft, like, I didn't know how the sausage was made on how a lot of these deals got done and how you operated with people. I had to learn it on the job. And anyone can do that for sure, but at least I had a baseline of what I had seen and what I could map it against. And so I hate to burst anyone's bubble on trying to get upset over we need H-1B reform or immigration reform or AI is taking everyone's jobs. Those are all great conversations to have, but that's not what happened here. Just to be super clear on that's not what this was at all. This is just trying to shrink layers of management, get the sales team more lean and mean, reduce headcount from overhiring during COVID. That's at least Adam's perception on what's going on. Certainly, again, as we're having an academic discussion, none of that's been confirmed or said by our employer, just so we're clear. But that's certainly what it feels like and the impetus for it.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, and I do really like your analogy of trying to think of this like a cybersecurity incident, right? Because it's like you do all this stuff to protect yourself, but in the end, something's going to happen. And maybe you get lucky. Maybe you're one of those people who work in tech like your entire life, your entire adult life, and you never get impacted by a layoff. Well, congratulations. I mean, you're probably among the minority. But for the most part, I think if you work in it long enough, this will happen. You know, my dad got laid off, I've gotten laid off. And really, like, throughout those times of watching what happened with my dad, and then like also what I've experienced, I've learned a couple of things, you know. So just like quick things is, number one, I always do a yearly review of my resume. And usually, because of the fiscal cycle of Microsoft, I typically do it in June because, you know, more often than not, they do a restructuring in July and something might happen. And so usually I update my resume in June. This year, funny enough, I did not do a review because I was thinking, I'm in sales. I'm not going to be impacted. And I was way wrong about that. But you know, it's something that I plan on doing this month for sure. But yeah, always keep your resume up to date. You know, usually at every company you have like a yearly review. You can just easily steal a couple bullets or something like that off of your yearly review at your company and put it right on your resume and just kind of keep it up to date.
That's a really good idea. Make it easy. You're already doing the work for your annual review where you're highlighting your achievements for the year. Find the most impactful ones and put them on your resume under that job. And since we're talking in the context of layoffs hopefully happen in mass. It seemed like they notified almost everyone on July 2nd this time. So that's 9,000 people looking for jobs all at the same time. Any way you can give yourself a leg up. If you already have your resume updated and you're not trying to do it at an emotional time, when you may not be at your best, when you may not be thinking your best, you've already put in the work, you're ready, gives you a leg up over everyone. It's now a 9,000 person race to find those openings, and you're at the front of it. So it's a great idea. And it's always good to do anything ahead of a time that might be highly stressful, highly emotional. And instead, when you can look at it with really clear and rational eyes in mind.
Yeah. And definitely make sure that you are reaching out to contacts. You know, if you've been in the industry long enough, if you've changed jobs, I think this is harder if you've been at the same company for a very long time and you've never been outside the company. Maybe you've worked with partners, maybe you've worked with other people outside your company, but you know, try to reach out to those contacts. If you're in tech, you got to have LinkedIn. I can't really stress this enough. I know like social media is not really great in general, but you really have to have some sort of LinkedIn presence. I just talked to a friend over the weekend who actually worked for IBM, and IBM did a downsizing and he was impacted. And so he's just starting to get out there, and he was on LinkedIn and he had like 66 connections. You know, it's like you got to have a little bit more of a presence than that, you know, network. Hopefully, maybe you went to some conferences or something and met some folks. Reach out to people at other companies that you've worked at. You know, like when I got laid off the first time at Microsoft, as soon as the words were out of the HR person's mouth or my manager's mouth, I already had my resume. I just updated it. I started looking at job links and I reached out to contacts. And here, the other thing too is that because I know that this can happen anytime, really, like it happens a lot at the fiscal year for Microsoft, but really it can happen anytime. I'm actually always kind of looking to see what jobs are out there.
Mm-hmm.
I'm always just kind of looking, whatever company it is. I have, you know, Palo Alto in my feed. I've got Zscaler. I've got, you know, AWS, whatever. Like just checking it out. Like I'm not like actively job hunting, but I need to know what's out there. And I keep up with other folks, especially for local companies in my area, people I've worked with. And when I got laid off at Microsoft the first time, because I had been kind of keeping up with what was being posted, I knew of a local company with a person that I had worked with in the past that was hiring a cybersecurity person. So I just reached out to him. I'm like, hey, is this position still available? Are they still hiring? And he's like, yeah, let me get you in contact with the hiring manager. And guess what? That was Exact Sciences. My boss was Doug Turchek. He's been on the show before. And, you know, I was hired as their cybersecurity, you know, analyst to begin with. So yeah. So like, make sure you're keeping up with your contacts. LinkedIn is really important. And as long as you're succeeding and doing good work, you know, like Adam said, like we had a lot of really talented people. This was indiscriminate, just random. So a lot of people who have a lot of good bullets on their resume. If as long as you're doing good work, you're not burning any bridges, then you probably have some good contacts that you can reach out to see if they have positions open.
Another one of those, don't wait till you need it things. LinkedIn like you're going to need it in the future today. That one always blows my mind, because LinkedIn is basically your greatest safety net you can have in your career, because that's yours. It belongs to you. It doesn't belong to your employer. So first off, make sure your LinkedIn email is set to your personal email. Number one, do not have it set to your work account, because how terrible would that be to get locked out of your LinkedIn account when you need it the most? So absolutely everyone listening to this show right now, if your LinkedIn account is tied to a work account, go change it. But you should be connecting as broadly as possible. And I know, look, I have worked in tech, and especially earlier in my career, I didn't appreciate networking. I mean, it sounds like one of those kind of slimy things that they want you to do that makes you say a fun fact about yourself. And it just, if you're in tech, like it feels gross. I get it. It's not my favorite thing, especially if you're introverted. But networking is really how you get jobs. It really is. I mean, Andy just gave a perfect example of how that helped him. It wasn't the only thing. And I know we all want to get hired on merit alone, but having that network can be that foot in the door, can be that getting you added to the interview loop, can be that extra oomph to push you over the edge and differentiate you from another candidate. It does matter. And even if it feels uncomfortable to you, you've got to embrace it. It's so important. And it's one of those things that I do know, if and or when I get my layoff notice, I have built a really broad LinkedIn network, and I am optimistic that they will help me be able to land something very quickly if and or when I need it. So get that LinkedIn profile fully filled out, a professional picture, a headline on what you do, fill it out, all your positions, your education, certifications, everything. Take it seriously, because that's the other thing. Recruiters will look at your LinkedIn and be like, well, this guy or gal can't be bothered to fill out a LinkedIn. What makes me think they're going to do a good job for us? It shows your attention to detail. It shows your ability to complete work assigned to you, or work that's not assigned to you, work that's on your own time and is kind of extra credit. So put in the work and do it before you need it, because that's your safety net. Having those connections built and being able to leverage that network if and or when it's called upon is huge. And I will say, when I got that business update email and I'm freaking out in the 40 minutes waiting for that call to happen, the first thought that went through my brain is, thank God I have such a big network on LinkedIn. If the worst happens here, I can put out the bat signal on LinkedIn, and I'm pretty confident I can get something lined up pretty quickly. So you will not regret it. And for the introverted folks on this podcast who don't feel comfortable with that, push past the discomfort. Do it anyways. Get out there, network yourself, get connected with people, build a network. It's so important and so helpful.
Yeah, and because we're talking about like being prepared, right? Assuming breach, being prepared that any day your number might be up. I'm not suggesting that you dial it down and just send it in, just Office Space style, and just kind of clock in and punch in and not do anything, right? Like, one of the things that the CEO at Trek told me once, he said, when there's a position open, if there's someone who's available within the company that can fill that position, and I know that person, I'm going to hire them, because I know that they have been doing good work and they can do that job. And so he said, you're interviewing for your next job every single day. That's what he told me. And I've always taken that to heart, because I'm working hard now. Just because I know that, like, I might get laid off tomorrow doesn't mean I stop working hard. I got to put in the work here. I got to make contacts here. I got to get good bullets on my resume. Got to win awards, whatever it is, and that'll set me up. I got to do all I can to learn as much as I can. Like, always be learning, whatever it is. Like, you're going to trainings, you're going to conferences, all of that's going to set you up so that if something happens, you are already prepared and you have the things lined up before you go. And so don't think like, oh, just because I'm going to get laid off, I'm going to just sit here and not do anything. I know that for us, I mentioned at the beginning of the show, morale is down. Yes, it's going to be hard to just go into the office tomorrow and be ready to go, but we will be. Like, give it a couple of weeks. I think right now everything's raw, but we will be ready to go. And we're not going to just sit back and not do anything. We're going to have a great year, the people who made it, and we're going to continue to do good work. But that doesn't mean that we're still not getting ready just in case something happens, right? Like, you just got to have it, be mentally prepared that something's going to happen, and maybe nothing will. And that's wonderful. But, always be training, always be doing the things, working hard in your current position. And if you got to send out the bat signal on LinkedIn, you have all the credentials, all the work, all the contacts to back that up.
100%. I love that you called that out. To me, that's almost implied for how I would go about my work, but I think it's worth saying. And you could apply that broadly to so many things in life, to where there are many things that are inevitable or likely, but we do them anyway. I mean, you can apply that to you could take that to such an extreme, or you could be like, why would I make my bed in the morning? I'm just going to sleep in it again. Why would I brush my teeth? I'm just going to eat more food today. Like, there's so many things of like, why would I do that? Because this is just going to happen. Well, you work hard because it's the right thing to do, and you invest in yourself because it protects you moving forward. So there is that balance as well. At the same time, Andy, I love that you're advocating for that, and I would totally agree. And I'm going to go to work tomorrow. We're recording this Sunday, July 6th. So Monday, July 7th will be my first day back in the office, and most people's first day back in the office since last Wednesday, which was the day this all went down. What I'm going to do is I'm going to show up for my customers who need help, who reach out, who have questions. Many of them won't be my customers in this fiscal year, but there have been no handoffs yet. There's been no transition. And so until that happens, they're my customer. And I'm going to handle myself with the highest professionalism and give my best effort to my customers, just like I did on June 30th, June 29th, and every day before that, because it's the right thing to do for them. And it's the right thing to do for me as well. Now, on the other hand, this does also bring up the point that work-life balance still matters too. And you can pour yourself into your work. You can be a high performer. You can be at the top of everything. And these cuts, again, are random by design. They're indiscriminate on purpose. And so one thing that does not get factored into who gets laid off and who doesn't is who worked 80 hours a week and who worked 50 or 40. It doesn't really factor in. So at the same time, I agree with you, Andy, 100% go and invest in yourself. Be always looking for that next role. Be acting for the role you want, not the one you have. But at the same time, keep in mind that you are one cog in the larger system. And sometimes these things will happen, and they will happen more or less regardless of how much you've given up for them. Because, well, this person sacrificed 3 of their children's baseball games to work events doesn't save you from a layoff at the same time. So there is a balancing act here. We're both saying, and we are both very hard workers, but at the same time, you and I are both really good at when it's time to turn off for the day, we turn it off. Andy, I don't know if you still keep a separate phone just for work, but you used to have your work email on a different phone. That wasn't even your daily carry. You and I are both really good about, hey, yeah, I'm not on call. I don't do after hours stuff. I'll pick it up tomorrow. So there's that too.
I actually shut my computer down every single day. Like, I don't even keep, I know that sounds crazy to a lot of people who have like tabs open and Excel work spreadsheets or whatever, but when I'm done with work, I shut it down.
Yeah.
So what I wanted to end with is just some interviewing tips, because if you're going back into the job market, and this is something to think about, right? Not even if you're going back into the job market, if you've been in a company for a very long time, you probably haven't interviewed in a while. And so, like, talking with my friend over the weekend, he had been in IBM for 14 years. And so he's just getting out, and he was talking to me. He's like, hey, I've submitted a bunch of applications. I've gotten a bunch of interviews, made it to a bunch of final rounds, and then they went with someone else. He's like, I need to figure out what I'm doing wrong to try to make it over that. And so I wanted to give like my experience, because one, I've done a lot of interviewing, and I'm also have been on the other side for Microsoft, being the always on hiring like panel. So I've actually been the interviewer for a lot of the sales roles within Microsoft. And so I get an idea of what I'm looking for when I say yes. And of course, like it's, this is Andy's bias and like what I look for. But I also take this into my interviews when I interview, and I will say, knock on wood right now, I am batting 1,000 for like the last 15 years. For every, like I haven't always gotten an interview for every application, but in the last 15 years, if I have gotten a face-to-face interview, I have gotten an offer. So
You and me both. I'm in the exact same boat.
yeah.
I haven't done a lot of interviewing, but when I have, I've gotten the job offer.
Yeah. And so this is just kind of like my high level tips off the top of my head. So first things first is your first impressions, and what you wear is extremely important, at least to me. And maybe this is an old school way of thinking of it, but I have always worn a suit to every single interview, including the ones that are remote via Zoom or Team or whatever. I'm always wearing a suit. Now, arguably, maybe today, like you don't need to wear a tie because ties might be out of style. I still do personally. And you might think I'm just going to wear a polo shirt or whatever. Let me tell you, if you're a guy and you're interviewing remotely and you wear a polo shirt, and then the next interviewee is a female, you will look like crap, because the females, they are dressed to the nines. They have their makeup on, they have their hair done. There's no female that shows up to a tech interview or remote interview that is not like dressed ready to go. They have a blouse on, they have like a work suit, whatever it is. They are dressed as if they are a professional. And if you're that guy who looks like he's going to go play 36 rounds, you're already off to the wrong race, right? Like you need to look like you are ready to come in. And here's the thing: if I have two people that one took the time to put on a suit and the other one has a t-shirt on, and they are equally matched in credentials and I like them both, I'm going to take the person who put in the extra time in their appearance. And maybe that's my way of thinking of it, but it's something small that takes very little effort that can distinguish you. They're like, oh yeah, that guy wore a suit. He's ready to go.
It comes down to tiebreakers more than you realize too, right, Andy? Like you'll get through a loop of interviews and you'll be like, man, there's some good people there. About 2 or 3 of them would be great for this job, but this one stood out, and it was because these 3 little things. I like the way they dress better, and maybe this one answer to this one question, but again, like that could be the difference. And so it's one of those, I know, and I agree with you. And I did the same thing last time. I did one and only one like virtual interview loop, got the job. It was to be a Surface seller, and I actually, went all the way through, got an offer letter, and then got cold feet and didn't take it. But I wore shirt and tie for sure. And it was one of those things where it was like, why wouldn't I? And I will say this, even if you feel like, oh, well, that's outdated, that's old school, it will hurt you less than it would help you. So the ratio of like times it helps me versus times it hurt me, you may get someone who's like, they're trying too hard or whatever, but that is so far and few between compared to the Andys and Adams of the world who'd be like, yes, I like that, extra bonus points for that. So yeah. I would definitely vote for dress it up.
And then what I would also do is just kind of prepare like general answers. You got to have like stories like ready to go, because all the interview questions are the same. Like everywhere you go, they're going to ask about your conflict resolution, your teamwork, and they're all going to do it with the same type of questions. Give me a time when your manager made a decision that you didn't like, but you had to, do it. Tell me what it was and how you dealt with it. Or tell me a time that you disagreed with a teammate and, how did you resolve that? Like it's all the same thing. So have like stories ready to go. Like just look up, do an internet search of like top 10 interview questions and have answers ready to go. Have those stories ready to go in your mind. And then the one question will almost always come up, like, give me one of your strengths, one of your weaknesses. And this is a trick question, right? Because you want to make your weakness, like no, everyone has a weakness. First off, like if you say I have no weaknesses, BS, right? Like you're a liar. Everybody has a weakness, but you have to state a weakness and make it not look like a weakness, right? And so for me, I'll tell you my go-to. Here's Andy's go-to weakness, okay? I am a results-oriented person. What does that mean? It means that I thrive when I'm able to accomplish a specific task or end a specific project. Like when you clean a room, right? And you see the results of that cleanliness, that energizes me, right? If I half clean a room and I don't get done, that bothers me. So it's just like a tech project or a program. If I'm like halfway through it, it's going to take a year to complete. That is really difficult for me because I like to see the end, the result. And so how I deal with that, and this is how I answer it, how I deal with that is I make myself mini tasks, little checklists. And so each day I have a checklist of stuff that I'm going to accomplish, and I do that, and it gives me a small step towards the overall goal. Great. So that's a weakness because it doesn't energize me when things aren't done, but I have found a way to work around it. So I gave like two things right there. Is one's a weakness, and then the other thing is how I deal with it. So it's not really a weakness anymore. So you got to find a way to state something like that, like, oh, I'm really bad at time management because I get my head, I put my head down and I just work all the time and I miss things or something like that, right? But how I deal with it is I set an alarm and every hour, and I kind of recharge myself or whatever. Find a way to state your weakness as a weakness, but it's really not a weakness. And so things like that, right? So like have these answers ready to go. And then the final thing is you got to be personal. You got to have some personality. Find a way, if you can, to connect with the interviewer on a personal level. If there's an opening for it right away, like don't ask them personal questions, but let's say like, I'm interviewing with Adam here and I see he's got an Xbox. Hey, you like Xbox? You a gamer? I see you got the Xbox thing in the back. I'm a big gamer myself, and then maybe he'll ask me, maybe he really likes games and he's like, oh, what game are you playing? Oh, I'm playing Final Fantasy or something like that. And he's like, oh, I love Final Fantasy, blah, blah, blah. So it's like you find a way, or, he doesn't have anything on there now, but, I know he's a big Iowa State guy. And so if you had an Iowa State thing there, I'm like, oh, yeah, Iowa State, that's where they made the first computer or something like that. And then, you get all geeky about it. And so you connect with that interviewer on a personal level, and that makes you look human. And when you connect with another human, it's not just about the job anymore. Now it's about, okay, do I like this person? Could I like hang out with this person? If I have to sit next to this person for 8 hours a day, can I stand that person? And so
that's the calculus, right? That goes into it, is I'm going to have to see this person a lot.
Absolutely. Yeah. And so have some personality, try to connect if you can. If there's an opening for it, take it. If there isn't, sometimes there isn't, and that's okay. But if you don't have any personality and you seem boring, you could be the best qualified person for the job, but maybe you may not get it because they think you're a boring person. So those are like my quick hits on like, what I have learned. And also like when they ask you a question, silence is deadly. You might want to give like a couple of seconds if you're thinking, but I generally try to start talking right away and filling the silence and thinking about what I'm trying to say and just kind of continuing. And hopefully I can gather my thoughts as I'm talking. It's a skill that you need to like learn how to do, because if you sit there and don't answer, that's going to be just kind of the interview killer. So just start talking, maybe clarify the question if you need to. That's a pet peeve of mine if they ask me to repeat the question, because it's like, did you not listen? But yeah, just start talking and hopefully you can form a coherent sentence. And like what you could do is practice that, just have someone ask you a basic interview question, then answer it, and like time yourself on like how long it takes you to process the question that they're asking, and between you speaking, and starting to answer.
Great advice there, across the board. And I won't repeat anything you just said, Andy, other than I agree with almost everything you said. It's just kind of adding on to the attention to detail stuff. There's a lot of interview material around attention to detail for in person. Obviously, good grooming, make sure you smell good, make sure your fingernails are filed, like all these little things that are going to be noticed. Less of that for online stuff. And maybe not everyone notices, but some people will. And it's also like take the time to make sure your lighting is not terrible, that your video and audio are decent. I personally would say, unless you absolutely cannot have a professional background behind you, like try to find a place to set your laptop or your computer where you can have a background, or even a bare wall is fine, as opposed to the blur. I think that just looks a little better, little more professional, and a little more open. Like you're sharing, like Annie, you mentioned, like you could call out stuff on my bookshelf behind me because I don't blur my background when I do calls at Microsoft. I want people to see behind me because I've curated it on purpose to be professional. And so if you can demonstrate that, if you've taken some care, I'm not saying you need a podcast microphone. I'm not saying you need a ring light, but maybe you can orient yourself so your face is angled toward your window. Maybe you can just test your audio with a friend and make sure that it sounds okay. Just go through those little attention to detail things that's going to make you show up the best. And people will notice that too. Especially, I mean, if I'm hiring you for a tech job and you can't do a Teams call or a Zoom call without being in the shadows and sounding like you're in a tin can, that concerns me because that shows a lack of attention to detail or lack of effort. And so all these little things can matter too. So just things to think about as you go through that process. And then on top of everything Andy said, the only time in which silence is great is when you're negotiating something. And so you could even almost make a reference to that if you're interviewing for like a sales job. You could say, if I were negotiating with a customer right now, I might let there be silence intentionally, but I want to answer your question right away. And that could be just a little like wink, wink of I'm filling this air on purpose. Not that I'm afraid of letting there be silence, because that's one of the most powerful techniques in negotiation is not throwing out the first word. So a good technique to demonstrate you have awareness of, even though in the interview process, you are trying to kind of fill air and like Andy said, think on your feet, which is also a good skill to demonstrate too. So I think some terrific advice there, Andy.
I have two final thoughts here. Let's hear two more things. One, don't use your browser and AI to look up the answers, because I have been the interviewee, and let me tell you, we can tell. I can tell when you're typing. I can tell when you're not looking at the camera. And I can also tell when you're just reading something off of the internet. So just don't do it. If you don't know it, say you don't know and pivot to something that you do. That's also a good interview skill to have. Hey, I don't have experience in this, but I have experience in this, right? They asked me about Google Cloud or whatever. Hey, nope. But I do know Azure. I do know, AWS, and I can learn Google Cloud really quickly. So don't look stuff up on a remote interview. Obviously, you probably won't have that chance in a face-to-face, but don't do it on a remote, because the interviewer can tell. And I can tell when you're reading just directly off of like the webpage.
Well, and AI writes and speaks in such a certain tone too. It's a dead giveaway. I mean, we all have learned how AI talks now, and it's pretty darn obvious. And keep in mind, an interview is a two-way interview to that point as well. If you show up to an interview and you think you're pretty well qualified, and maybe they ask you one question where it's like, I don't know that one. A great workplace, if you show up and say, to Andy's point, no, I don't know that. Here's what I do know. Here's the process I would follow to learn it. I'm curious to learn it. And I bring that growth mindset with me. A great workplace will want you because of how you answer that question, because you showed curiosity and growth mindset and ability to learn and a learn it all mindset. A bad workplace, a toxic one, won't. It's self-selecting. If you're trying to interview for something and you don't get the job because, boy, you nailed 19 out of 20 questions, but that 20th one, boy, you didn't know that. Like, you don't want to work there anyways. Keep in mind, this is a two-way process, and you should also be eliminating employers sometimes based on the interview. And you did trigger in my brain one final thought too. You talked about prepping answers to common questions. You should always have in your pocket a question you like to bring for the employer as well, because they always want it with any questions for me.
Yes.
Don't say no questions.
You should always have one.
Always have one. And it doesn't even have to be hard. I mean, one of my go-to ones is pretty simple. It's tell me your most favorite and your least favorite thing about your job. You can learn a lot from that. That's really valuable. I mean, a lot of people told me at Microsoft when I was interviewing to come here, they said my least favorite part of the job and most favorite part of the job, it's the same thing. It's how fast everything moves. Like I love it. It's so energizing because things are always moving so fast. There's so much to learn, but at the same time, that's the hardest part. It's really difficult. And that encapsulated it really well. That's my lived experience too. So, but that's my go-to. Have your own, whatever you're curious about, but have a question. When they ask any questions for me, yes, I have a question for you, and it is X.
Yeah,
Always bring that.
It could be like, what's your job like? What's your daily job? You know, what do you do throughout the day? What are the benefits like? You know, what is your favorite thing about the company? What do you like about the company? If they have nothing to say, like normally people put their best people in an interview, but I have been actually in an interview where like the guy was like ready to quit, and he's like, yeah, I don't like the company. You shouldn't work here. And I was like, oh, okay.
Okay, thank you.
So, I mean, that's happened. So like, you know, you, like Adam said, you can get a lot from asking them what they like about the company.
It's not just your chance to like beg for a job. It's a two-way learning experience. You learn too. And if you haven't gone through an interview process where you've learned something and go, I don't want this job anymore, then you're not doing a good enough job on your end, because it's a chance for you to learn too. So
Yeah.
you should be trying to eliminate jobs as well.
Yeah, and research the company. Like, you know, try to find people on LinkedIn. If they're publicly traded, you can always download like their shareholders report and all that. So you can learn a lot going into it. My final thing that I wanted to say, I had two things. The last thing is kind of going back to the layoffs, because this was something that I learned after the fact. And this is something that a lot of people don't know, because it's an emotional time. You're just kind of trying to gather your thoughts. If you get offered a severance package, which is pretty common for most companies, especially tech companies, Microsoft, when they lay off people, they give them a severance package. That severance package is negotiable. So you can go back and ask for something to be included more, you know, based on your years or whatever, and time, whatever, more healthcare on the payroll, something you can ask. And just like with a salary negotiation, you know, it's better to have asked and get denied than to have never asked at all. So I didn't know that severance packages can be negotiated. So you should read it over. Don't sign it right away, because it's a legal binding document. There's a lot of things about it, like maybe non-competes or whatever, that are included in the document. So review the document, and then, you know, if you have asks, you can present it in a good way, you know, like, hey, based on my work here, based on the number of years, I believe, you know, I should have this much more, whatever it is. And so it's something that can be negotiated, at least ask. So I didn't know that. And so I'm just kind of educating people, like, at least try, because if you don't, then you don't even get the chance.
The answer is always no if you don't ask. And they're typically also gated by an NDA. In a lot of places, you have to sign an NDA too. So before you see the details of the severance package, so keep that in mind. And obviously honor your non-disclosure agreements. In general, layoffs are an opportunity to demonstrate your professionalism and keep the door open if you want in the future. Andy and I have a group chat with several. 2 of the 6 have been laid off and both have returned to Microsoft. Well, no, 3 of the 6 have been laid off now. And that gentleman currently does not plan to return, but and Andy, you boomeranged back, and our other friend did as well. And so it's, if you handle yourself with class and professionalism, there's certainly open to return in the future. And so having optionality as an employee, as a worker, is highly powerful, because we don't always have optionality. So the best thing we do is give ourselves as many options as possible. You may never want to return. That's fine, but be super professional about it, so you at least keep the door open. There's no point to doing anything else. It's not professional, and ultimately it hurts you. Like, this isn't about, oh, well, we need to honor our corporate overlords. It's just more like, hey, for you as an individual, your best move is keeping you the most options open. And that means handling yourself with class and professionalism, because it keeps your options open.
All right. Well, that's our show for this week. It was a lot of good discussion here. Hopefully you have some takeaways for you. And, you know, if you were impacted, I know I'm available anytime to chat if you need some advice. I've gone through this many times. So if you have any questions, our contact information is in the show notes. And if you have topics you want us to talk about in the future, just reach out to us. Thanks, and we'll talk to you guys next week.
Thank you for listening to the Blue Security Podcast. Please check out the show notes, catch up on episodes you may have missed, and subscribe so you don't miss any future episodes. Find Andy on Twitter @AJaw0 and Adam @AJ Brewer. See you at our next episode.